Before we start, if you're enjoying these conversations, please make sure that you like or subscribe to Cleaning Up. It really helps other people to find us. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation. Hello, I'm Michael Liebreich, and this is Cleaning Up. Welcome to Season 5. My guest today is the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. Ban Ki-moon served from 2007 until 2016. Please welcome Mr. Ban Ki-moon to Cleaning Up. Mr. Ban, Secretary General, thank you very, very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to see you again. We've been working very much on sustainable development, climate change. I think we are still working to realize a sustainable world. But first, we have to address this climate change phenomena. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And I was very honored to work for you under Sustainable Energy for All. And in fact, even before then, when it was just a coordinating function led by Kande Yamkala. But tell me, the last few years, we've not interacted during this terrible pandemic. And you've done some work on that through your foundation. What has been your contribution there?
The first thing I did after my retirement was to establish a Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens in Vienna, Austria. Then, of course, I established my foundation, Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future in Seoul, Korea. Other than that, these will facilitate my work as a former Secretary General, because I have been invited, or I have been participating in many different very important international conferences where people were talking about climate, sustainable development, human rights, etc., etc. I am now holding several positions as a chairperson or president of international organization. One is Global Center on Adaptation on Climate. This is headquartered in Rotterdam, Netherlands. And then I am also president of the Assembly and the chairman of the Council. Both the titles I'm holding in the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. The headquarters is located, fortunately, in Seoul, but it is with the 41 member states. And I'm also working as a chairman of the Boao Forum. As you know, this is what the Chinese people called Asian version of the Davos Forum. This is the largest, the biggest forum, policy forum in Asia. But of course, many European and American people participate. I'm the chairman of this, and I'm also the chairman of the Ethics Commission of International Olympic Committee, for which on that capacity, I'm going to participate in Beijing Olympic Games. I was re-elected this year in Tokyo Olympics for 4 more years. And I'm also working as a vice chairman of the Elders. This is an independent, organization composed of former heads of state or government or Nobel Peace laureates. I'm vice chairman of this, and several others, but I cannot, describe all what I have been doing, but I have been significantly very busy in participating, in doing almost the same things as a Secretary General. Yeah.
Yes, and we should note that we're recording this just 2 days after the passing of one of the elders, Desmond Tutu. I believe he was one of the elders.
Yes.
And very sad. I mean, he lived an extraordinary life, and we should pay our respects to him for his contribution, I think.
Yes, I'm very saddened that he has passed yesterday, and the elders have issued a statement mourning his death. Yeah, yeah.
Very good. And we can link to that in our show notes so that people can read that statement. But it must be strange for you. When we last met, it was in Bern. You had just been elected for your first term as chair of the IOC Ethics Committee. So that means that we have not spoken for 4 years. But it must also be just the last few years extraordinary for you, the lack of travel. Have you ever in your career traveled as little as in the last 2 years? You're lucky that GGGI is located in Seoul, South Korea, but everything else you've presumably done mostly virtually.
This year, I began to travel twice to Washington, D.C., twice to New York. Then I traveled, of course, Tokyo to participate Tokyo Summer Olympic Games. Then I traveled to Netherlands to open an office in Rotterdam, new office. But this GCA, Global Center on Adaptation, was established in 2018 with the initiative of the Dutch government, but it is composed of about 30 member states, including European Union, Germany, and many European countries. And there is very climate-friendly headquarters was established in Rotterdam. That is the world's largest floating office on the sea. It was opened by His Majesty King of Netherlands last September. I was there, yeah. And I was also in Austria. Okay,
so you have started the relentless travel that we spoke about 4 years ago. You have started again. I want to ask you about the pandemic, because you've been at the pinnacle of global affairs. Do you think coming out of the pandemic, hopefully we are coming out of it, if not now, then certainly during 2022, we would hope. But do you think when it is eventually over, the global system will be strengthened by the experience, forged through the flames of the pandemic? Or do you think it has exposed such fault lines, inequalities, that they will sort of fester and hold back global action on everything from peace to climate change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, the reason why we have to suffer, why we are suffering from this pandemic is because the world's leaders have always been forgetting what they had to learn from their past experiences. We have been repeating all this since the beginning of the 20th century now, starting from Spanish flu in 1918. And then I sincerely hope that we will be over from this pandemic. Then whole world's people, particularly political leaders, they have to remember what we have been suffering, not to repeat again the same foolish mistakes. There were many warnings. In 2014, the many Western African countries suffered from Ebola. The mortality rate was much, much higher than this, coronavirus. Mortality rate was 45% at that time. At that time, United Nations and whole international community, particularly United States, was, coordinating very closely. Then we were able to eradicate Ebola in a relatively short period, not 2 years like this way. What we did at the time was that I discussed this matter with Margaret Chan, the then Director General of WHO. Look, it seems that this Ebola crisis cannot be handled by WHO only. So let's work together. Then we brought all these Ebola things under my direct control. So United Nations, World Bank, CDC of America, and the whole organizations of the United Nations, including WHO, work together. Then I immediately reported to the Security Council. Then Security Council, in just one day, upon my recommendation, adopted the resolution stating that Ebola disease is a serious maintenance and is a serious threat to the maintenance of international peace and security, and decided to establish UNMIR, United Nations Mission for Ebola Emergency Response. That was for the first time in the history of the United Nations when UN established a military, a mission for the purpose of health. And even military people were dispatched. United States, United Kingdom, France, and they dispatched, military soldiers to block all these three most stricken countries, like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea. And I traveled myself, and together with the World Bank, we mobilized the whole necessary resources. And General Assembly was very quick again to endorse all what I was doing. And then early March last year, 2020, I telephoned to Tedros of WHO. Look, this seems to be a very serious issue. You may not be able to handle this crisis alone, WHO alone. WHO, by its own nature, is not an operating organization. It's a research and education, etc., etc. But they don't have that capacity now. And then, unfortunately, President Trump, he withdrew membership from WHO rather than supporting it. That was the beginning of the problems unfortunately, for international community. Now, the fight over who was the origin, where was the origin of this pandemic, could have done much later. We should have addressed this one first. And then we could have discussed this one. Now, with the other variants like Delta and Omicron, now we are, overstretched now. WHO is overstretched, and United Nations, is not well organized. I'm not blaming, but we have to learn from what we had done before. This is a very important lesson. That's why I'm emphasizing that we must not repeat. If unfortunately, if anything happens in the future, then we have to immediately remember what we had done now. So we must build back better now. We must build back, and we have to do much better and much more for climate action. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And if I paraphrase, my question was if you think we'll come out stronger or weaker, and your answer really is it's up to us. We have to learn the lessons.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's up to us. Yeah.
And that is certainly very applicable to climate and to the energy access challenge, which is where I was privileged to work with you in the past. I want to move on to that. You have spoken. It was under your leadership that the UN sort of switched on to energy and clean energy, sustainable energy for all as an issue. If we go back to the Millennium Development Goals, energy did not feature, even though it was so essential to achieve them all, but it was not a goal. And then if you move forwards to the SDGs, which of course were developed under your period as Secretary General and with your mentorship throughout, of course, we've got SDG 7, Sustainable Energy for All. And you've spoken in the past about why it was an issue that resonated for you. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Energy is an important component in the everyday life of everyone. In particular, a smallholder, businesses and farmers. But without energy in 21st century, you cannot do anything. So that's the period. it can support the transformation of healthy, inclusive, and sustainable food systems so that both the production is improved and the environment is protected at the same time. The three main drivers behind all this transformation are ensuring food security, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions of the end user sector, and increasing resilience to climate change induced hazard. We need clearer roadmaps and the joint action among all stakeholders around the world to influence the path forward for clean energy in terms of funding, diversity, innovation, and policymaking. The Ban Ki-moon Center, located in Vienna, was a contributor to the key findings developed by the UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, a Vienna Energy Forum's virtual series, Vienna Energy Forum's virtual series. This series summarized in a set of policy recommendations for policymakers to align their energy transition effort with sustainable food system. As you know, in September 2011, that's me who announced at the General Assembly a new initiative called the Sustainable Energy for All, where you worked as a very important partner there. Then General Assembly, upon my recommendation, declared the year 2012 as the International Year of Sustainable Energy for All, sending a clear and strong signal about the centrality of energy in ending poverty and addressing climate change. All this is a cross-cutting issue. Without energy, you cannot do anything. Now we can really, I called for action around the three objectives to be achieved by 2030. First, ensure universal access to modern energy services. Second, double the rate of improvement of energy efficiency. So double the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. So modern energy services, energy efficiency, and the reasonable energy mix. These are very important ones. As you mentioned, Kande Yumkela, I appointed him as a special representative for sustainable energy for all. So I really thank you for your own leadership in engaging in C for all, sustainable energy for all. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to serve during the creation of that initiative. And in fact, Kande Yumkela is a former guest on Cleaning Up. I think it was around episode 17 or 18. And he talked us through some of the negotiations behind the scenes, how he actually got the Americans and others to accept those three goals that you spoke about. I just wonder if you were doing the same exercise now, whether you would also include access to broadband internet for all, given the importance of the internet in learning for children.
Energy access is extremely crucial for everyone, including children, the generation who go to school, especially now when schools are closing because of the pandemic. Now, however, the digital access and the energy access are inherently unequal and threaten to deepen this learning crisis. But even before the pandemic, in many instances, children have no light to do homework for work. This is exactly what I experienced during my time when I was young children. We didn't have electricity. I had to study under the dim, candlelight or something like this way. So, it's very sad that still at this time, 21st century, there are more than 1.5 billion people or around so who do not have light energy service in their homes. The need to use, again, the internet exacerbates the energy access issue. It comes with additional questions and connectivity and internet cost, especially in developing countries, as well as broader capacity needs like digital literacy. Now, the overall need for clean energy access for intensive usage, including production, should be focused. Simply installing a solar light to read at night only illuminates poverty and does not tackle the systemic issues before us. So we have to really make sure that everybody has access to sustainable energy. Yeah.
Absolutely, I entirely echo that sentiment, and it's something that I look forward to working on again and continuously, in fact. I want to move forward to the Paris Agreement, which of course also 2015 took place during your term as Secretary General, and some would say it was one of your crowning achievements. We've spoken on cleaning up to quite a few of the major figures, Laurence Tubiana, we had the US negotiator Todd Stern, Amber Rudd, who was the UK negotiator, and quite a few of the supporting cast, people like now Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, Teresa Ribera, Rachel Kite, who of course was your special representative on climate and energy at the UN, in fact was our second guest very early. So we're creating this archive of memories, in a sense, of that negotiation. What are your memories? What do you recall most vividly from that extraordinary 2-week period in December 2015?
One of the most reproduced images from that day is, of course, holding up in arms with Christiana Figueres, myself, and also Laurent Fabius, president of the meeting, and President Francois Hollande, and Al Gore, who was jumping, dancing, like everybody was excited. Everybody was excited. I have never seen such kind of an exciting moment when everyone was jumping to dance, So that means, conversely speaking, how difficult the negotiation had been and how much, tired people were, just fatigued. So at least from learning from the humiliation in the Copenhagen COP15 in 2009, people, reaffirmed their commitment. Look, we have to make it happen. Then I think that kind of humiliating failure has given us some motivation and solidarity among the people of the world to do something by 2015. That is what I can tell you at this time. I cannot go on detail how difficult all this are detailed in negotiations, but that was to my mind, one of the very few moments when whole worlds were united without any difference. They were united for people of the world and our planet Earth and for the future of our succeeding generations.
Marvelous. And we actually spoke to Laurence Tubiana about how the outcome exceeded her expectation, with the 1.5 degrees being mentioned as the aspirational goal, with the 5-year ratchet and so on. And of course, the first 5-year period turned out to be 6 years because of the pandemic. But the 5-year ratchet period, the first one came up in Glasgow COP26. So do you think that Glasgow built sufficiently on the success of Paris when you followed the outcomes? Were you pleased or were you disappointed?
It's half and half. I had a much higher expectation in Glasgow. And it's true that the UK government officials led by Alok Sharma, and many other, the foreign minister, Rad, etc. Everybody was concentrating their time and energy to make it a great success. Of course, at the end, there are some positive developments and some disappointing developments now. While we knew that we entered negotiation without large emitters being present on a leadership level, like Brazil, China, India, and Russia, we did some successes, like South Africa's deal with the donor countries to end the coal in the next 20 years. Nigeria's pledge to cut emissions to net zero by 2060. But and also one was that we were able to have a rule book, which has been pending for 5 years. A rule book was done now, and China and United States had made some agreement on reducing methane, as well as some other political agreement. Now, on methane, the pledge, there are more than 100 countries joined. That was a positive one. Over 20 countries have signed a statement aligning international public finance with a clean energy transition. That was the first time a broad group of countries have agreed on the need to shift overseas finance away from all fossil fuels and financial institutions and instruments and toward the clean energy. Now, there is some disappointing issues that they were not able to agree on the roadmap of funding $100 billion as they have agreed in 2009 in Copenhagen. I sincerely hoped that the big countries, the donor countries, would have agreed on this. Now, one positive thing, one thing is that they agreed to agree. They agreed to agree in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt next year for that. So without providing financial and technological support to developing countries, we will never be able to expect that we can do it. Then Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet signaled on importance of much needed philanthropic capital to catalyze much greater levels of investment needed for countries to achieve their energy access. Now, then another one is some disappointing is that they have not been able to agree on carbon neutrality 2060. Because of the Indian objection, they agreed that by or around the middle of the century. But another positive aspect is nobody's talking about that. Everybody's talking about carbon neutrality 2050, even though legally speaking, people agree that by and around the middle of the century. That means it can go to up to 2070, as India insisted. But many countries, including South Korea, they have firmly committed to carbon neutrality 2050. So we must make sure that carbon neutrality 2050 and also ambitious NDCs by 2030, nationally determined contributions. Otherwise, global temperature will rise up to 2.1 degrees or 2.4 degrees Celsius. That's something which I would never like to even, imagine. So we have to work very hard, very hard.
So interesting, because I mean, in a sense, those are a list of the disappointments in a way. But I look at it and I say, well, you know, in the Paris Agreement, net zero was before the end of the century. And so, you know, I look at the direction of travel. I don't see Glasgow as the destination, but I see it as an incredible improvement and tightening along the way from Paris, using the Paris framework. So I think you may be being too modest about the success of Paris in getting us on this arc, this bending curve down of emissions. And
when you have higher expectations, then there is naturally some more disappointment. But basically, I'm a positive thinking person. Without positive thinking, without positive mind, you will never be able to make any success. So in that regard, trust me that I'm a positive thinking. So there are many positive issues, yeah.
Let me turn to one of the achievements of Glasgow, but the issue that it highlights, which is the US-China relationship. And we've just heard, actually, one of the recent episodes was with David Sandelow, who's one of the great experts on that US-China relationship as pertains to climate. We saw the agreement both before Paris and before Glasgow between the US and China, which really enabled the agreements to be signed. But is it really possible to be optimistic, you know, given the rising tensions between those two blocs, between those two countries? You know, how optimistic can we be? I'm just very concerned that if we see supply chains being separated, if we see a Chinese internet and a US internet, if we see more and more tensions in trade, but also in actual spheres of influence in Southeast Asia, is climate action likely to be at some point a casualty?
Well, considering this political confrontational relationship between the US and China, I think in Glasgow, they made a good positive cooperation when it comes to climate. And that is most important part. As you know, US government or some other people was saying that there are three big capital C, confrontation, you know, cooperation and competition. But this is the cooperation area of cooperation. I was happy to see an obvious presence of US at the COP26, including President Biden himself and John Kerry, Special Envoy. And also he had a very good meeting with his counterpart of China, Xi Jinping. Now, while there is clearly political will, it is also disappointment that the US did not enter negotiation with financial stamina to back this up now. It was also a positive surprise, to see the US and China issued joint Glasgow Declaration on enhancing climate action in the 2020s, which sets a good example and shows a dedication from the two countries toward combating climate action. I have been speaking out that without Chinese support and working together between President Obama and President Xi Jinping, this Paris climate change would not have been possible. We might not have Paris Agreement at this time if this kind of a political confrontational situation continues. It was because President Obama and President Xi Jinping worked together. When there was a G20 summit meeting in Hangzhou in 2016, President Xi Jinping took an initiative to invite the President Xi Jinping and myself. So three of us met before the G20 summit meeting began. that was, if my memory serves me correct, September 3rd, 2016. And then the initiative was that both President Xi, China, and the United States presented the ratification certificate that they have ratified Paris Climate Change Agreement. The rate of emission level combined by two countries became 42% out of 55%, which was required to enable the Paris Climate Change Agreement to be ratified, effective. So having 55 countries and with 55% of global greenhouse gas emission was a huge task, but just two countries have taken 42%. It was easy. So that's why the Paris climate change became effective on 4th of November 2016. Then just imagine, suppose what had happened. Suppose it had not happened after 2 months, President Trump came into power and he withdrew from the Paris climate change agreement. Then we would not have this one even now. So I'm still these days, sighing, having a deep sigh of relief that we are having this one. Now, the matter of cooperation between China and the United States is something which I ask and urge them to work on these global issues first, rather than confronting on political or security issues. I think first come should first. The climate does not discriminate who is United States or China. They just, take their own course. Nature doesn't listen to what we say. We have to listen to the voices and warning of the nature.
Right, so we can't negotiate with physics.
Yeah, that's right.
But what we've got now is a potential collision course between the goals of climate action and the various foreign policy and also human rights requirements of the world. Because, as you know, the great success of Paris and then Glasgow and so on is built on the fact that renewable energy has become so cheap that it has become much more of a no regrets. It's become no regrets for countries to adopt climate action, or much lower regrets. And that's been because of the lowering of costs. And a lot of that has been driven by supply chains, by Chinese manufacturing. And of course, a lot of the solar grade silicon comes from Xinjiang province, which is the epicenter of China's activities around the Uyghurs. And the US has now passed legislation saying that companies must certify, must be transparent, that their supply chains are slave labor free. And this is, of course, very confrontational. It's very contentious, but surely that sort of human rights, that scale of human rights abuse and the action, does that not trump the short-term requirements to deal with climate action?
Now, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to support what China is doing. I'm just saying this one out of my own experiences or wisdom. I think we need to have a wisdom in addressing all political, economic, or global challenge issues or human rights issues. There are something which needs to be done first, then we can do it later. When there is a fire, you must put up fire first and save. Otherwise, you cannot save humans, people who may be there stocked up there. Human rights is inalienable rights of human being. And we have UN Human Rights Council where we can address this one. But as I said earlier, the climate change does not care where you are coming from. It's nature versus humanity. Humanity versus planet Earth, or climate versus planet Earth. So we have only one planet Earth, and we have only one life. So we have to take urgent action, regardless of what. Just to put out fire, which is burning. Sea level is rising. Climate change is approaching much, much faster than before, and then we might expect. There's no time to lose. Therefore, I'm really urging political leaders, use your wisdom first, and think about our own humanity, future of humanity, and our planet Earth. Then let's work on that first. Then let's talk about human rights. Then, I'm, as a former Secretary General, I have been a vocal, supporter, vocally, criticizing those countries who do not support human rights. And I'm doing same thing again now. But at this time, we have to put out fire first. We have no time. Nature has its own way. We cannot, negotiate with the nature. That's what I have been repeatedly saying even 10, 15 years ago when I was a Secretary General. Now, even after my, assignment, responsibility as a Secretary General, I'm repeating the same thing. Let's focus on this issue. Yeah.
But isn't the reality, though, that we have to deal with both issues at once? The human rights, there are others who would say that human rights is the fire and that climate change is the one that is, of course, it's going to, it is a decadal problem, but the human rights are here and now. And, you've already mentioned that as part of your role as chair of the ethics committee of the IOC, you will be going to Beijing for the Olympics. The US, the UK, Australia, and Canada have declared a diplomatic boycott. Is that an appropriate way of dealing with these two issues at the same time? Or do you think they should put that aside, go celebrate the Olympics, deal with climate change, and come back to the human rights issues?
Let there be no misunderstanding. Let there be no misunderstanding. I don't want to be misunderstood by what I have said, that I'm not paying attention to human rights. I am much, much more a vocal person when it comes to human rights. I have been working for women's rights. I've been working for same-sex, people who are discriminated from our daily lives. And let there be no misunderstanding that I'm going to Beijing despite all this diplomatic boycott. This has nothing to do with the diplomatic boycott. I am the chairman of the Ethics Commission of IOC. I have to be there during the games. It is mandatory. It's a mandatory. I'm doing my own job as a chairman of the Ethics Commission. There was some report that my going there became a news, but this has nothing to do with the current political issues on human rights issue. I am going there. Then what about the IOC president? Why he's going then? It's the same logic. Then what about all these sports people, athletes? So I think we should not mix sports with politics, and we should not mix this climate with the human rights. We will continue to focus. We will continue to argue against China to improve their human rights. But at the same time, we have to address the most urgent issues. We have to tackle this climate issue. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you recall, in fact, I'm also an Olympic athlete. I was a skier in 1992. So what you've said about the athletes should not certainly be caught up in any of this, because this is their their career, their life, their aspirations. This is everything to them.
Of course,
I think I have probably come down in a different place on the diplomatic boycott, which I believe is actually a justified and an appropriate thing. But I also appreciate that your role as chair of the ethics committee is very different, and you have professional responsibilities. It is an incredibly complex area, and we don't really have time. We could do a whole other episode of cleaning up on how the Olympics could be used to further action on climate and also human rights, and those very important issues that you raised about gender inclusion and also LGBT issues, where we had a fantastic conversation with Lord Brown, probably one of the most senior gay business people in the world, former CEO of BP. But as I say, we're out of time, so sadly. But I would love to thank you for coming on to Cleaning Up, for talking with us, for sharing some memories of the Paris agreements and your thoughts on some of the most pressing current issues of the day. It's really, truly a privilege to speak with you.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. And thank you for your leadership, continuing leadership on working on energy and climate and all human rights issues. And let us work together to make this world sustainable and better for all. That's our moral responsibility for me. I do not have any political and legal responsibility now, but as one of the private citizens, but with using my other titles, and I'm going to continue until we can declare that we have done something to make this a sustainable world. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I very much hope that we can meet in person soon.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So that was Mr. Ban Ki-moon, 8th Secretary General of the United Nations. My guest next week will be Pasquale Pat Romano, CEO of ChargePoint, the US's leading technology provider for electric vehicle charging. Please join me at this time next week for a conversation with Pat Romano. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation.